Hi, I'm Kylie Davis, and I'm doing the dengue virus fever. The basic structure, virulence, and toxicities. It's a mosquito-borne single positive stranded RNA virus of the family, and I'll probably mispronounce this, Flaviridae. And the homology of the surface antigens on the 4 serotypes of the dengue virus is a major factor of the virulence because it tricks our immune system. And how it tricks our immune system is the surface proteins of each serotype are they're just different enough that the antibodies that adhere to it doesn't deactivate the virus. And instead it invades the macrophages, inducing the release of cytokines, which compromise the tissue permeability and cause a more severe secondary infection. And the cascade of the infection is called the antibody-dependent enhancement. And the toxic stage, only about 5% of the people who actually get dengue fever get to the toxic stage, but the toxic stage, in this stage, if someone gets there, at that point, it only lasts 1 or 2 days, but it's toxic for a reason because the body in this stage, the plasma leaks out of the body in its small blood vessels. And obviously we need the plasma, so that's why it's called the toxic stage, because it can be very deadly. Interference with the pathophysiology. It changes our immunity. That's how it changes our pathophysiology, and eventually someone can be infected by all 4 of the species, the different kinds of dengue fever, because there are 4 different serotypes. And so once you're infected by one dengue, that serotype, you'll have a lifelong immunity to that specific one. And you'll have only a partial immunity to the other 3. So and that lasts usually about 2 years. It's kind of, some people, they've been known to have it for up to 3 years and some only a couple months. But generally it's about 2 years, and eventually someone can be infected by all 4 if there has been an outbreak in the community or someone keeps coming back and they keep getting it. The likelihood of someone actually being infected by all 4 isn't very likely, just because the more you get infected, like the first time you get dengue fever, it might not be very bad, but every time you get it, you're at an even higher risk of getting severe dengue fever, which can be very deadly and is very painful. Populations, where this is the risk areas in the world where it's more prominent, where you could catch it easier than, say, in the United States or in Canada or something like that. And it's more common in developing country, in tropical regions, and subtropical regions. And a few examples of some high-risk areas is Southeast Asia, Western Pacific Islands, Latin America, and the Caribbean. So very popular places that people go to travel and on vacation and things like that. And so that's why it's more common, especially in Africa. Whenever people come home and they say they've been in Africa and they go to the doctor, it's one of the first questions, so that way they can be prepared, because symptoms just depends on who you are. The effects that it has on the community, it has a large financial impact on low-income families. It has longer waiting lines in the hospitals, which can be problematic, of course, and outbreaks of dengue fever and its symptoms. So mosquitoes in general, they travel in swarms. Obviously they're always around, but they travel in swarms. So whenever there's a dengue fever, then that usually means that there's going to be an outbreak. And when an outbreak hits the community, the low-income families suffer more than anyone else for 2 reasons. Because getting treated for the dengue fever is expensive, and it may be more severe, it may not be, but they're low income, so sometimes the treatments are very expensive and they can't afford them, which puts their child or them at risk. And the other reason that it affects the low-income families is they're more likely to get the dengue fever, because with them being more low income, and they're in developing countries, they aren't able to purchase the necessities that they need to help protect themselves, like netting, and I mean, they're more likely to get the infection than the wealthier families in some of these developing countries and such. Treatments: rehydration therapy. You want to avoid aspirin, non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs, corticosteroids, and should also be avoided. If severe enough, more serious actions may need to be taken. Rehydration therapy, it can either be orally or through like an IV, and it's just whenever you have dengue fever, you have severe vomiting and fever. So whenever you're throwing up, you're losing a lot of your fluids, and it makes you dehydrated. And if they catch it early enough, it'll just be making sure that you drink more water. But if you've been throwing up for a while and it's a bit later, sometimes they'll put an IV to make sure that you're getting the fluids that you need. You're making sure you're replacing and replenishing the fluids that you're losing. And the other reason for that is to cool your body down, because whenever you have a fever, you can easily get a 103 fever that's too high. If you have it too long, then it'll cause issues for your body and health issues for long after, and you could even die, obviously. The reason you want to avoid the aspirin, non-steroidal, anti-inflammatory, corticosteroids is because they're blood thinners, and whenever you have dengue fever, a lot of times there's some kind of internal bleeding, even just a little bit, and they're blood thinners. Blood thinners make you bleed a lot easier, and so if you have too much of those, you could easily bleed out and not even know it, and they don't want to risk hemorrhaging. They don't want to risk hemorrhaging. And severe enough is whenever you become toxic, or say it's the second time that you've had dengue fever, and they may want to hospitalize you just to make sure that it doesn't get any worse by putting an IV in, putting you on a heart monitor, just to take extra precautions. Prevention: you can wear protective clothing, protective netting. Some bug sprays are effective, and avoid being bitten by avoiding the high-risk regions. Avoiding the high-risk regions isn't a very practical one, because most of those high-risk regions are in high areas where families go to travel and stuff like that. So your best bet is to wear protective clothing, wear some long sleeves. If you have some protective netting, that'll help against some species. There are some species during the day are called the biting mosquitoes, and they'll bite through the nets, but no net is less protective than a net, so it's kind of what you want to do. Some bug sprays are effective because most bug sprays say like off. They target specific species of mosquitoes and bugs, usually in the US, because we're the ones who buy it a lot. And once you go somewhere else, you can spray that on you and it'll get rid of some, but they're specifically targeted for ones that aren't where we are. So it's better than nothing, once again.